This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to welcome everyone to today's regular meeting of the Hudson River Black River Regulating District at the Lewis County offices in Lowville. We'd like to thank County Administrator Ryan Fichet, is that correct? And the Lewis County Board of Legislators for hosting here today. For members of the public attending remotely, the agendas are available at hrbrrd.ny.gov under board meetings. We ask that you please close other programs on your computer or phone, silence your cell phone, and mute your audio when not speaking. The conference organizer will monitor the program's chat function for public comment. We will begin this morning with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So I'm calling the meeting to order at 10:06. Roll call, Mr. Leslie.
Board Chair Mark Finkel.
Here.
Board members Albert Hayes.
Here.
Timothy Reagan.
Here.
Kenneth DeWitt.
Here.
Mr. Byrd and Miss Allen are excused. Executive Director John Callahan.
Here.
General Counsel Robert Leslie here. Chief Engineer Robert Fultan.
Here.
Chief Fiscal Officer Timothy Nietzsche.
Here.
Director of Administrative Services Stephanie Rzicki.
Here.
Thank you, Dean.
Sorry. Mr. Candido. Alfred
Here.
Candido.
Here.
Apologize for misordering that.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Ms. Leslie. Now I need a motion to adopt today's meeting agenda. We have no need to go into executive session that I know of.
I'll make that motion.
Mr. DeWitt.
Second,
I'll second.
Mr. Reagan.
all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Is there anyone for public comment? Anybody on?
Nobody on it, nobody is signed.
And no guests. Okay. Next, we need the approval of our March 29th, 2023 regular board meeting minutes. I need a motion to accept.
Second.
Second,
Mr. DeWitt.
any changes or revisions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Report of our executive director, Mr. Callahan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My report can be found on pages 16 and 17. I'll just note a couple other items for the board. One, this is Public Service Recognition Week nationally, and it is fitting that we recognize, obviously, we've got some great executive staff colleagues here, but consummate public servants in both the Black River areas and the Hudson River areas. I'd like to particularly recognize Kim Scott, Megan Cole, who are here with us today. Extraordinary colleagues, very dedicated and diligent in everything they do here in the Black River area. Hopefully we may see our colleagues, Mike and Josh, later on, for those of you taking a tour of the Hawkinsville Dam, and of course our colleagues in the Hudson River area as well. So we just have a great team here. It is small, but elite. Right, Kim?
That's right.
That's right. And we thank them ever so much for what they do each and every week, but especially this during Public Service Recognition Week. And since we're on that topic, thank again the board's approval previously for filling the maintenance specialist position at Sacandaga Field Office. It has been filled by Jim Cranker, so we welcome him aboard and hope that all the members of the board have an opportunity to meet Jim this summer sometime, maybe in the next few weeks or perhaps at the June board meeting. Do want to note just a couple other items of interest that are coming up. As the board knows, and the board has approved earlier this year new docks for SFO, partially funded by the advisory council, but primarily to accommodate the large number of law enforcement and emergency responder agencies that we partner with and that mobilize out of the Sacandaga field office. So along those lines, we have a press conference with multiple agencies on May 18th to talk about boating safety in the upcoming navigation season. And on May 25th, we will host that annual multi-agency exercise. We hope that members of the board that are able to stop by and participate in either of those events will do so. I'll be communicating more with the board on those items. And otherwise, lots to discuss today. One item, but probably a long discussion, so I'll yield and pause for any questions the members may have, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, well, I want to ditto your comments on the staff and so forth. This is a pretty easy job that we have because of the competency of the staff, and I want to echo your thanks and our appreciation.
Thank you.
Any questions for the director?
Just one question. Under permit department highlights, tag 56 failed to remove permit areas and remove permit signs. So people didn't want.
These are just, these are renewals, Mr. DeWitt, that are not sent back by the deadline or within the grace period. And typically, we will have a couple of dozen of those in the Sacandaga field office for the Great Sacandaga Lake permit system. Maybe close to about double our normal volume. And we are speculating that to sort of correspond with the largely successful, we think, online permit system, in order to retire our Soviet era printer, I can't even recall the dot matrix printer. We went to a different permit form this year. So it appeared, it didn't have those multiple copies and you had to detach the bottom part. And for people who always look for a certain thing, we wonder if maybe more people than normal miss that for some reason. So typically what people will do is they will show up maybe between now and Memorial Day weekend or slightly after. They will see the permit signs and say, oh, geez, I forgot to renew. I'm sorry. Obviously, the late permit fee will apply, but we'll be able to get them renewed. In some cases, what we've seen over the last couple of years is certainly a higher volume than typical in home sales. And that could be partly part of the cause as well. People have sold a home, and the new owners of the property have not yet been in to apply for the permit. So a couple of different things at work there, but that's what that's.
So many houses are going up around the lake. Just amazing.
And as somebody who missed the deadline, me, I did renew and I did pay the extra money. It just got by me. I forgot. Not any of the things you said, just I forgot. Any other questions? Thank you. Contracts and actions. Resolution to increase the project budget for contract D012022 with Environmental Service Group of New York for additional work at Hawkinsville. Mr. Falk.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. My memorandum is on page 18. In May of 22, the board awarded the Hawkinsville Dam remediation construction contract to the Environmental Service Group, ESG, for a price of $1,722,015. Construction commenced in September of that year and was initially anticipated to be completed by December of 22. Since then, construction progressed relatively well on the east side of the project during the fall of 22, included completion of the east spillway concrete abutment and partial installation of embankment dam fill material. Although completion of that dam fill material, or that partial completion, was somewhat delayed last fall as a result of ESG's inability to timely locate and procure the proper embankment fill material. Simultaneously with construction activities on the west side of the project, progressed steadily also and included demolition of concrete outlet structure and demolition of the existing concrete abutment and partial demolition of a concrete wall. Work slowed and then was suspended on the west side of the project in mid-November due to loose and liquefied soils encountered during the excavation work adjacent to the existing west abutment. Soil conditions encountered on the west side of the project led to the decision to use a shoring pile and lagging system to retain the west bank soils and to prevent movement of the saturated soil from the west bank into the construction site. Now, this was unanticipated at the time of bidding and clearly something that our engineers had not included in the original bid documents. The design and construction of the shoring system was not anticipated at the time the project was bid, and ESG attempted to continue work on the project west side and in December and through December and January, but made little progress, and its activities were limited by those loose soil conditions. Much of ESG's effort during the period was focused on design and plan submission of and receipt of the district's engineer acceptance of the shoring system, which we refer to as the Phase 1 shoring plan. Inclement weather compelled the temporary shutdown of the work on the east side of the project at the end of December, further delaying the project completion date. Implementation of that Phase 1 shoring plan began in February, however, was short-lived as subsurface conditions, and particularly the depth and lack of bedrock on that west side of the project, forced ESG to suspend implementation of that Phase 1 shoring plan and develop an alternative plan. The work did provide useful subsurface exploration information, which assisted ESG in their design of the Phase 2 shoring. A redesign of the shoring plan was developed by ESG and accepted by the district's engineer March 28th of this year, and implementation of that Phase 2 shoring plan began on April 10th. And currently, after a rather extended pause for that design of both phases of the shoring, the project is now moving forward toward completion. Restart of tangible work came after some lengthy delays in the construction schedule. As is the case with most construction projects which experience scheduled delays, the Hawkinsville Dam remediation project scheduled delays have affected the project costs. Unfortunately, the project schedule delays are not the sole factors which have impacted the project cost. Factors to date which have impacted project costs have included contractors' effort to address the loose and liquefied soil conditions, management of the bank soils that were entering the site, and additional excavation. Initial design of the shoring system by the contractor's engineer, partial implementation of that Phase 1 shoring plan, redesign of the shoring system by the contractor's engineer, and then implementation, as I said, which has just started now in April, of the Phase 2 shoring. And I provided in that memo a breakdown of the anticipated additional construction costs associated with the West Bank shoring system. The Phase 1 shoring system, which was partially implemented, had an additional cost of $171,873. The Phase 2 shoring plan it has an additional anticipated cost of $411,481 for a total of $583,354. The staff recommends completion of the additional work and seeks board authorization to amend contract D012022 to include the additional work outlined above, and seeks authorization for the executive director to execute an amendment to increase the contract price by $583,354 to a total contract price not to exceed $2,305,369. And I would be happy to answer any questions.
Well, I know there are a lot of questions. I know you had some you wanted to discuss.
I mean, to begin with, let me make sure I got things straight, because that, I could be wrong and thinking totally wrong. So I want to kind of go through
Sure.
my understandings and make. Was Kleinschmidt the original engineer?
Kleinschmidt is our engineer.
Who did the project, scoped out the project? We gave him the scope of what we wanted done. The objective of the project was to replace it or fix it. They came back with a scope of work to do.
Yes, they came up with
Yes.
a design plan for remediation for the facility to be compliant with dam safety, state dam safety regulation.
It seems like the shoring into the banks, if I understand that right. How could that be missed?
Well, based on limited information that they had and that they worked off, Kleinschmidt worked off of, based on observation of bedrock, they came up with a design. And unfortunately, bedrock 20 feet beyond the end of the existing spillway was much lower than what they had anticipated.
I would think that would be part of the design of going through from just a safety standpoint. Can I ask a clarifying question? Tim you may be answering Kleinschmidt's original design for the shoring, once it was determined shoring was needed. Tim might be asking whether. Mine's actually both.
Okay.
Mine's saying the scope of work. You would have thought to be able to come up with a scope of work, somebody would have to understand where that bedrock was, especially on a dam.
Right.
I mean, for buildings, they go and they drill holes.
Right.
To determine, what's underneath so they know what they're building into.
Mm-hmm.
And I would think for a dam that's holding back a bunch of water, that would even be, and I'm not finding fault with you. I'm just trying to understand this.
Yeah, no,
of going
Kleinschmidt conducted a subsurface investigation, led the subsurface investigation based on their recommendations. There was subsurface drilling on the east side, and then based on their observations on the west side, no additional drilling on that side. They moved forward with their recommendations to the district based on those observations that they had in the field. So based on their knowledge of the spillway and the structure on the west side being founded on bedrock, they made assumptions as to how and what would be designed to meet dam safety and to construct the project. Those assumptions that Kleinschmidt made were not correct. The assumptions were that bedrock would be at a higher grade, and it turned out that it was significantly lower. So as a result of that, we needed to have the contractor come up with a methodology and a means to excavate that side of the project because the bedrock was so much lower.
I understand that you had to come up with a plan because of what you ran into.
Yeah.
My question goes back to the original design of the project.
Right.
Is Kleinschmidt, I mean, this is done. This is moving forward. It's done.
Sure.
I mean, I understand that. But are we using Kleinschmidt for the next project for engineering?
No, we have different consultants for all of our projects.
So. Is that acceptable? I mean, just from your standpoint, Rob, maybe I'm looking at it wrong and stuff I'm going through, but is that acceptable to you? That something like shoring the side of the bank and not knowing that what you're building into was acceptable on a dam?
Well, in hindsight, it probably would have been beneficial to have more subsurface investigation. So Kleinschmidt drawing the conclusions that they did based on their limited observation was not as good an assumption or basis for their design than have they recommended subsurface investigations further into the hillside to the west end of the project.
Yeah, and again, I'm not trying to find fault with you or anything. I'm trying to understand the people that we are paying to do things and why we have such a big mess of going on. because the engineering aspect, we brought in a contractor, project manager for up there to manage it because it wasn't being managed effectively. And I can't remember, I think it was like 175,000. And they talked about the weather and stuff. We brought that up, I think it was in the December meeting.
Mhm.
Because of the weather, we probably had the best fall and the least amount of snow in this area.
Right.
And, you know, I've been here 27 years and 27 years during that time of going forward. So that was a miss, coming back with more money. And just on a rough figure, the project's, 33% over budget of going on a rough figure of going through on that. And so it just seems to me that we went through a process. We paid people good money to come up with a process and stuff. And there's big failures in that process. And so I don't know if we have any recourse to go
I was
back
gonna ask
after,
if we do.
go after them to say, hey, you guys, this isn't acceptable. And then, but I go back to the biggest thing. It's a safety aspect on the shoring of going through in there. How do you miss that as an engineering firm?
All excellent questions, Again, Klein Schmidt, based on their observations, their engineering expertise, decided that there wasn't a need for additional subsurface investigation on that side. So,
But, and the amount of money that we're being asked for, it's, the construction people are out that money, right?
it's a construction cost.
Right, it has nothing to do with Klein, I mean,
It's not Klein, that's not Klein
right,
Schmidt.
they've incurred this cost.
Yeah. Well,
Due to.
part of it.
Yeah.
Part of it is the phase one shoring, which they have incurred. The other part of it, which is the phase two shoring, which is $411,000. That is the work that they have just started as of April.
But it needs to be done.
But will need to be done.
But I think to Mr. Reagan's point, Chairman, we go back to the absence of the shoring in the original design
Right.
and the bid documents.
No, I understand that.
And,
Yeah.
and that does go back to, I think, Tim's question, not to put words in your mouth, but how do we learn from this miss on the engineering consultants side and apply it to future projects? So not to put it. No, that's, I mean, or the question.
I was
is
just trying to point out that
Kleinschmidt,
Klein Smith is not the one that's out of this money.
Right.
That's
Of
all.
course.
Should they own a piece of that?
Right.
Going through is your question. And the second question I got on it is that because when you came back and told us we had to take project engineer there, I'm laughing to myself because I said, this is the last we're going to hear about money. Because if you're going to come back through. So then my question becomes, how much of what the contractor lost because he didn't, I don't know, whether, I don't know, I'm not close enough to know whether the resources were there, the right people were there for him or what. But it seems like we're picking up his loss now too, because there truly has been a scope change now. And do we know how much of the scope change additional cost is from his loss? I'm sure if he's a smart contractor, he would capture his money. Because they don't stay in business if they don't.
Right. Well, we do receive detailed information about the estimates for increases like this. So, we check to make sure that things are reasonable, that there aren't excessive.
Based off of what?
Oh, the amount of time that they have, labor, the duration that they expect to rent
But who's
equipment.
tracking their labor? Who's tracking their renting the equipment?
Well, once we receive, as we did here, the proposal for the amendment, that is the amount that the contract price will change by and the amount that we will pay them. If he were to, and if it was because of something he decided to do, put more people out there, put more equipment out there, we wouldn't entertain paying that additional cost simply because he wanted to have more people out there.
Rob, would you just
So-
briefly, for the board, go through the process of how you review the invoices for payment and the notes that you're checking?
Sure.
And the occasions which you've refused payments and costs? Because I think that might speak a little bit to some of these.
Yeah, well, we first we receive certified payroll, and then any of the additional work and the sub work or a task that is a quantity-based activity, all of the records related to that have to be supplied. So we verify it. We also independently will measure in the field, so I can compare it to what the contractor has asked payment for. And if something doesn't look right, and if we feel confident that it's incorrect, we'll only recognize the amount that was placed. For example, the contractor requested payment for nearly full payment for pen stock and the gate structure. Well, neither of those were actually installed. They were brought to the site. And so in that payment application, we denied payment at this point because the contractor
Because you could
specifically
you
spelled
could tell
out.
that part, you got tangible things you can
Yeah.
look at and see.
Right.
But, again, my experience with projects and stuff, because of what's going on, very hard to follow just based off from the hours. And that's why we bid things out. We bid things out to get a bid
Right.
because we don't want to follow that detail, because the reality, it's impossible. My opinion.
Sure.
It's impossible to follow that and go through. So we bid it out to a person. He came back and they ran into some problems.
Yep.
Not due to anything with the structure at that point. It was just trying to get the right fill. Correct me where I'm wrong on this stuff. Get the right fill in, but they told us at that point, it was, they didn't tell us there was going to be more money. But at that time, we said we need a project manager on site to help execute against the project. Right?
Well, now you're talking about the engineer.
The engineer on
Right.
site.
Originally, and we had extracted, in order to try to save some costs on the engineering side,
Yeah.
tried to utilize just our staff who have been out there at least 3 to 4 days a week since the project started. And due to the complexity of, one, the proper placement of the earth and embankment material,
Yeah.
and then the complexities associated with the West Bank sloughing, it was at that point that the district decided it wanted to reinstate
Yeah.
Kleinschmidt's engineer on site full time in order to assure that there was a qualified person, engineer, on site to make sure that the project was tracking the way it should track. So the recommendation or the desire to have somebody out there full time came from the district, not from the engineer.
No, but I understand that. I understand that we made the decision that we needed somebody
Sure.
of going forward. And a lot was because the project wasn't going to game plan. There was
Right.
issues associated with
Sure.
it. There was a problem, they couldn't get the fill. You had to help go find to get the fill to bring it in.
Right.
Correct me where I'm wrong, where I forget something, because I
Yep.
can screw this up easy. So at that point though, the question becomes, okay, we need somebody there to go and do this stuff.
Yeah.
So as we did that, and I can't remember what the engineering cost was, I wrote it down, I gotta find it someplace, I got it. I think it was close to 25% increase over the engineering fee, I remember.
Sure.
Because if it was under 10%, I wouldn't have said it then.
Yep.
I mean, I give 10% and say, okay, that's give and take on that. So I said, well, I told John or somebody, I think I told John, I said, John, you're gonna be coming for money. And I asked you, did we have a scope change at that point?
Right.
And so then all this additional comes after.
Sure.
Of going forward. Okay.
Well, I mean, they are separable. The need, the need to have the engineer came as a result of the complexities of the project.
Yeah.
The need to put the shoring in, regardless of Kleinschmidt's inability to estimate where that rock elevation is, going into the bid, is something that the project would have needed even if we had completed subsurface investigations. Because the depth of bedrock isn't going to change just because.
You know what?
So they are separable in terms of.
They are separable, but they should have been combined. Because again, in my opinion, for a dam, we should have known what we were digging into for no other reason than safety. For no other reason than safety, there should have been some holes drilled or something.
Sure.
To determine what we were going into.
Yeah.
Not a guess on that. That should have been a sure thing. From an engineering standpoint, I can't believe an engineer, I can't believe an engineering group. I've seen for buildings going up and stuff, small warehouses where they drill holes because they want to make sure what they're going into
Right.
and stuff are going through. This is a dam.
Right.
That's what I don't understand, because then that starts the whole train. Because if the engineering was correct, we could have bid out
Yeah,
the
might have been
project
different.
as is. As it's gonna end up being.
And it probably would still be close to $2.3 million.
You know what, it might be, but we don't know that.
Well,
And we don't know
I
how
think we
much
have
is in there.
we have pretty good confidence because we've seen the estimate of the costs for the activities. And in those activities, the installation of the sheeting is reasonable. That's how we.
And that goes back to my discussion based on what? What criteria are you using to determine whether it's reasonable?
Mhm.
What's the hourly rate? How much is supposed to be able to be done during a set period of time?
Sure.
Am I renting equipment or do I own the equipment and I'm charging you back? You know, there's a lot of different, that's why I asked, there's a lot of variables
Oh, yeah.
of going through, and I don't know how you figure that out. That's why I push back.
Right.
So, all right.
Well, that being said, thank you. Thanks for the input. I think we understand it better.
Sorry.
No, nothing to be sorry about at all.
No, I don't, you guys, I don't like getting into this, but I can't be on here and just say this and say, we need to ask some questions and understand why people aren't doing the job right that we're paying for.
Right.
You know, going on, I'm not attacking you, I'm not attacking, I think we had a huge miss on an engineering firm, and all we do as taxpayers, we're gonna pay the money. What's going on? And that rubs me the wrong way. So,
Yeah. I think the point he's trying to make, if I can paraphrase, is that, yes, they made a mistake, and I don't know whether they're going to answer for that, but we would have had to spend that money anyway if they had done it right, even if
For
they
the
had
most
done it
part.
right.
And then the engineer's estimate, I believe, was $2.4 million. So the engineer's estimate before bids were received was $700,000 higher than the low bid.
Yeah, I was going to say,
So even the low bid, when it came in, there was a question from OSC, I believe it was, about, a question about why it was so low compared to the engineer's bid. And so.
maybe we should take the engineering. Their bid.
so we did,
Effectively, we are.
when we budgeted,
Let's get a motion on the table. I need a resolution to increase the project budget for contract D01.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair,
Yes, sorry.
may I ask a couple questions?
Sure.
And these are probably more directed at our legal counsel. So, Mr. Leslie, if I can put you on a spot for 1 minute. I just have two questions after all of this. Have you, as our attorney, was there an error that occurred by a professional firm that should not have occurred? Number one. And number two, if there was such an error, do we as a district have damages? So can you answer those questions?
I think the simple answer is yes and yes.
Okay, so now that begs the third question as what should we be doing? In addition to approving the amendment to complete the project. And I realize I'm not advocating at all that there's any delay on authorizing the dollars to be spent because the project needs to be completed. So it's actually, I'm trying to separate these two issues. So we can move forward on the vote. Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. But I'd like to also hold in place for another discussion on should we be taking other actions, and that's probably an executive session issue, I would think, because if we're going to pursue any legal actions. But I just don't want it to gloss over that if we were damaged at all as a district, if it's just a question of, here came a higher estimate, we got a lower bid, and it really cost this much money, and it's all we lost was time. What's the extent of the damages, how they're measured, et cetera. So I would just like to hold in place a further discussion after we settle the amendment.
I think great points, and just one other thing too. I guess I'm more focused on making sure the bigger project we got coming down, that whatever, we got some good learnings here, that we won't do it again. Because the bigger projects have a lot bigger price tag to them. So I guess that's the reason to dig, is how do we make sure we don't do it again?
And I think, Mr. Reagan and members of the board, one of the things you heard from Bergman is they did make a presentation on the Indian Lake project. They had just listened to some discussion around Hawkinsville Dam. And they took some pains during their presentation to point out some things that were not going to happen. But I think we all take that away. Certainly none of us want to go through this process again. And I know, Mr. Chairman, that Mr. Minicha was going to make a budget-related comment, but I think first, maybe Mr. Leslie might want to respond to Mr. Candido.
Well, I think there is culpability in a number of arenas, whether Kleinschmidt determined properly what they should force us to do, whether we agreed to allow them to spend all of the money they may have thought they wanted to spend. But there's also culpability on ESG's part. They probably went further down the wrong path than they should have. And Rob has been very, very adroit at limiting their ability to continue to spend bad money. We will get back some of that money from ESG. I anticipate we will be going to talk to Kleinschmidt about some of the money that they have taken on this project, and whether that was appropriately spent. But you're right. The key thing here is to complete the dam and ensure that the New York State dam safety tenets are upheld. And that really should be our priority at this point. There is time to assign blame later.
So the only thing that I was just going to mention is that at the time that the board acted on the budget for the current year in June 2021, we had not gone out to bid for construction proposals and things like that. We did budget the amount that Kleinschmidt in its final design had estimated was the cost. And even with this amendment, the contract for construction will be $41,361 less than what we had budgeted for this project. And I guess the only other thing I might mention is not purely financial, but when we did go to procure for construction, we got more than one response. And Rob will correct me if I'm wrong here. I don't have the precise numbers, but it wasn't like it was somebody bid $1 and somebody bid $10. It was somebody bid $1 and the other person bid $1.10 or $1.05 or something like that. So there were two firms who were in the same general ballpark, and it wasn't one of those, hey, we're gonna put in a low number and then we're gonna lie in the weeds and wait to hit you with big change orders and things like that. They didn't. That wasn't the circumstances around the competitive procurement that the regulating district underwent and that Rob led.
Yes, the second bid was about 1.83, 1.85.
So 100,000 more out of 1.7, 5-6% maybe.
I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but I do want to say one thing.
Sure.
Just because we budget enough money go through doesn't give me any comfort.
Oh, no,
I just
no,
want to tell you, that doesn't do a thing for me.
I hear you.
So, I mean, that's not.
It's a substantial contract amendment. I don't know anybody who would,
I just had to say that and get that off my
Don't know-
chest.
don't know
so I wouldn't
anybody
have
who
a-
would-
So my blood pressure.
we don't want that. And I don't know anybody who would disagree that this is a substantial contract amendment.
I don't, I didn't do anything. I'll stop being asked.
Okay, is there anything else from anybody? Anybody here?
If that, I'd entertain a motion. I will try, you're gonna make me read this again. A resolution to increase the project budget for contract D 012022 with Environmental Service Group of New York for additional work at Hawkinsville. Do I have a motion?
I'll make that motion. I'll make that motion.
Do we have a second?
Mr. DeWitt.
Any further discussion? I know we've discussed it a lot. And by the way, I do appreciate everybody's input on this. That's what we have to do as a board, not just rubber stamp everything. We need to question, and I welcome it. And if there's no other discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Move on to move into staff and committee reports. First one, General Counsel, Mr. Leslie.
The regulating district in Erie continue to wait FERC's determination with regard to our interest in the 56 feet of head at Conklinville and whether payments by Erie are duplicative of headwater benefit assessments that FERC already compels Erie to make. We have that project, the existing agreement expires June 30th. Erie had asked that FERC make a determination by the latter part of May. We're approaching the latter part of May, so we're kind of hoping that FERC will make that determination. We'll then have somewhere in the nature of 6 weeks to come up with a solution with Erie.
Are they getting another estimate, Rob, or is that, they're done? There's no more estimates going on, or?
So the problem there is we have our estimate.
Yeah.
And Erie just views the project differently than we do. We believe that our interest in the property right has value and that Erie has to pay for that value. Erie believes that they don't have to pay regardless of what we believe our interest is. Erie believes they don't have to pay for that interest. Once FERC answers that questions for the parties, we anticipate, one, that FERC will answer in the affirmative for us, and two, that when they do, Erie's next task will be to determine what they believe that value would be. To my estimation, Erie has not started that process. They don't have something in hand that they're waiting to hand across the table. Notwithstanding that we've been talking about this for on 2 years, and I believe that they should, at this point, know what they're willing to value that at. So I would anticipate that come June, absent any other input from Erie, we will have nothing to do other than say the value is 2.5 million and that's what you ought to be paying us. Whether FERC and Erie agree with that, we're still waiting to be determined. On the other project, on the Stillwater Dam, where we have the ground lease and water usage agreement, that is where the parties have each provided an appraisal those appraisals were disparate in their value, and as a result, the parties joined to hire a third appraiser. That appraiser has prepared their final determination of what they believe the value is. And at this point, we and Stillwater are discussing whether there are issues with that final appraisal that would affect the value of the plant and the lease that we would collect from Stillwater, were Stillwater to continue their operation for a period of time. We have proposed to Stillwater that they continue operating the plant for a period of time. We have suggested through the end of the power purchase agreement that Stillwater has with NYMO. Stillwater has rejected that proposal and returned with a counter proposal, which we have not had a chance to discuss internally yet. But from my perspective, falls way short of where we ought to be. That agreement also expires June 30th, and we also may be coming back to the board in June to seek a further extension of that agreement. And in that case, we are probably collecting more rent than will be shown on the final fair market value. Right. Beyond those two projects, there's really not a lot going on in the legal system other than the issues at Hawkinsville and the effort to make sure that Indian Lake progresses with their with DEC approval. To remind everybody that financial disclosure statements are due May 15th. If anybody has not done that yet,
Which is Monday, right?
Yep. It is not difficult to do if you've done it online. Just please remember when you get to the 20th question and they talk about save, you also have to hit submit. You can't hit submit until you hit save. Once you hit submit, it will tell you that you have submitted it properly. If you have any questions, give me a call and I can. Any other questions?
Any questions on that, call 1-800-HB, HRBR Law.
Yeah. That's right.
We just log in on the webpage and we find it there.
Yeah, the commission, I keep calling it JCO.
Can you
because I
just send out
remember
the
the
details of what we log into?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I haven't done it.
You're in good company there, Mr.
Anything else? Thank you. Director of Administrative Services, Mr. Zicki.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My report is located on page 23 of the board packet. Since our last meeting, I performed internal control compliance audits at our Sacandaga field office and the Black River office. In both instances, proper practices are in place and county procedures are being followed. As the executive director mentioned in his report, we have hired a new employee at the Sacandaga field office. We are also currently interviewing for the seasonal position at both the Black River area and the Sacandaga field office. Not included in my report, but worth mentioning, is today is Buoy Day at Sacandaga field office. Our maintenance staff are using the workboat and assisting DEC with the placement of navigation buoys. Today and tomorrow we'll be completing that task. Finally, on pages 24 to 26 of the board packet, you will find the contract reports. They are there for your review and satisfy the public authority requirement. That completes my report unless you have any questions.
Any questions? Thank you very much.
Movie day should be a holiday. It's the greatest day of the year.
I guess so.
Chief Fiscal Officer, Mr. Neef.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You can find the CFO report on page 27 of your packet. I'm happy to report the regulating district's cash position remains strong, with combined bank deposits and short-term investment pool investments nearly 39% higher than they were at the same time last year. I emailed a few days ago about the positive developments in the state fiscal year 2023-2024 budget for regulating district infrastructure investment at Conklinville, Sixth Lake, and Old Forge. We are grateful for the support from the governor, legislature, and supporters of the regulating district. We continue to take the necessary steps in obtaining financing for the Indian Lake project. We recently received word from the New York State Environmental Facilities Corporation that it had taken the listing we submitted and created a project from it. This is the first step in EFC's process of allocating financing from the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. Rob Fultan and I will be talking with representatives of EFC 1 week from today to further discuss the project. And let me stop here and offer to answer any questions you have about any aspect of the regulating district's finances.
Any questions? Thank you.
Before you move on,
okay.
could I
Before
indulge?
he continues, Mr. Chairman, if I may, Tim just mentioned it, but again, the good news in this year's state budget, which follows good news in last year's state budget, which followed great news in the year before that, it did not come by accident. I mean, the entire team here, especially Mr. Fultan, Mr. Leslie, have been involved in providing Tim the necessary ammunition to go out and generate this great news. But, you know, I say often that I think the one question the chief engineer had for me during my interview is, how are we going to pay for a then $25 million capital program over the next decade or so of critical infrastructure? And there was really no good answer at that time. So by the board's great work in helping bring about the language change and shifting the state tax, local property tax burden back to the state, and 3 very good years of good news in the state budget, we are now in a position where we can say our capital program is funded. We're able to complete these projects, and due in no small part to Tim's great work and the work of the entire team here. So, thanks again for that.
I agree.
One more indulgence, if you don't mind. I'd like to call your attention to the signed affidavit I emailed yesterday. Does anybody need a copy of that?
It's the last page of your board packet.
Terrific. Thank you, Council. It lists necessary and reasonable expenses incurred by board members relating to their participation in the March 29 board meeting. Article 3, Section 2 of the regulating district's bylaws require the board to approve any payment before reimbursement can be made. So before you ask for a motion to approve these expense reimbursements, let me offer to just answer any questions anybody has about this item and apologize again for the late delivery of this expense report.
I think we can forgive the late delivery.
Thank you.
But I do want to start charging out when I have to fill out that financial form. That ought to be worth $10,000.
I'm not your guy on that, but your views are noted here.
20,000?
Well, I need a motion to pay the expense
I'll make that motion.
of $133.62. Second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Chief Engineer, Mr. Fulton?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Report begins on page 69. April, in short, received, I think, just the right amount of precipitation. All of our watersheds, the Hudson River area was between 80 and, or excuse me, the Hudson River area between 80% and 100% of historic average, and 80 to 111% in the Black River area, but the net result was rather calm refilling of the reservoirs, and Sacandaga is up to the spillway and coming back down, and Indian Lake is, for all intents and purposes, full, and also leveling out. Stillwater Reservoir is about a half a foot below what we would typically target for the peak elevation heading into June 1st. So may come up a little bit more. And on the Fulton chain of lakes, Six Lake is reached full elevation, and its summertime elevation, and Old Forge is very close at this point. And so, having uneventful refilling, and we're in a good position for the summer, and our summer drawdown and augmentation, especially if it continues to stay as dry as it's expected to be over the next 10 to 14 days. Be happy to answer any questions.
Again, any questions for the chief engineer? Thank you very much, sir.
I'll take one.
Any other board member questions or comments? If not, I'll entertain a resolution for our next board meeting, June 13th, at a destination to be determined. Motion?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Hayes, Mr. Witt,
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion for adjournment?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Mr. Reagan,
I'll second that.
Mr. Hayes.
All in favor?
Always-
Aye.
Yeah.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for your input, and thanks for coming out to Lowville.
Yeah,
Thank you.
11:03.
Thanks, Al. So anybody going to tour the